Okay, I believe we are live. Hello, everyone out there. It's me. Um, so today I'm talking with virtual Maya, and you said you wanted to talk about the a singular phylogenetic tree of life, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me
Um,
find something here.
well, go ahead. So you are. Well, I guess I have to ask. Would you say that you're not convinced that there is one, or what?
Okay. I think I'm right now. Maybe I can learn something today. You make a lot of videos. You're pretty smart, but I'm seeing that all this evidence for evolution or the single phylogenetic tree of life, it seems to be kind of neutral. So here's like a drawing, right? Now I'm not sure how we could actually show that the single tree is true over. You know what the orchard of life is? The idea
Yes,
of
yes, I'm familiar with the creationist concept of the orchard of life.
yeah, they don't. Well, we don't know like what the original organisms were or the original kinds. But how do we know that the single tree is correct over the multiple tree?
Well, to form the a single phylogenetic tree, you just extend the same principles that you apply at small levels. How do we figure out that the two of us are related to each other? Well, we take homological structures and genetic sequences. We can look at that. We can figure out how closely we're related to each other. Then we can compare both of us because we can look at our ancestry, compare that to people in Asia and Africa and Tasmania, and we can build a phylogenetic tree of all humans. Then you just apply that same line of reasoning out further, and that it links us to chimps and gorillas and orangutans, and just build up the tree from any starting point, and you get the same picture. So
So genetics.
that's a large part of it. Yes, genetics is a large part.
So taking it to the extreme, how do we know that? Um, I'm just gonna call them blacks and whites peoples. How do we know that they're related? Or how do we know that they're not just, even though they probably are, but how do we know that just by looking at their DNA that you don't have the black person kind, the white person kind?
Because we know what happens when people give birth to each other. I mean,
Okay.
when you can do a paternity test, you can mix uh, races because it's just an arbitrary divide. You can mix races and track paternity. I mean, you
Oh,
are related. You are related to. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
yeah, I'm related to my brother, and
Okay.
we have a common ancestor, which is my dad. But
Yeah.
how do we know that that line of reasoning could be extrapolated all the way back to bacteria? I mean, I'm thinking that maybe it might. Right now, I'm thinking that maybe it doesn't. Maybe that just it only goes so far.
I mean, well, you're free to think that, but like I said, you're applying the. If you apply these principles of similar, of of uh, homologies in genetics and in structure, and you can show using the exact same principles that you and your brother are related to each other and you're related to all other humans. There's nothing stopping you from using that same line of reasoning to show that you're related to all other organisms. Although it does get difficult when you get down to prokaryotes because there's a lot more involved, things like horizontal gene transfer and things like that. And there's been a lot of time since our divergence from them, which is why it's more complicated than just
Okay,
simply tracking genetics.
so it sounds like the logic is that because my brother and I share a common ancestor, therefore all life shares a common ancestor, which was probably a prokaryote. Is that the line of reasoning that we're doing?
I mean, you're looking at genetic
'Cause-
homologies just among increasingly large groups of organisms, and so
Okay, uh, great. but also nested hierarchies. I want to say for one thing that I think evolution is a good theory. I don't want to be like
Cool.
I'm not like a Kit Hovind that thinks that evolution is evil and stupid and it's fraudulent. I just see that the evidence is kind of neutral when it comes to the single tree and the multiple tree.
I don't know
And
what
I
that
don't,
means by neutral.
that, for example, say DNA, right? DNA could work with the single tree of life or it could work with the multiple tree of life.
How would it work with the multiple?
Well, I don't know how the life form started because in the single tree, it started with abiogenesis, and most people see that as a pretty rational. It's pretty rational, but whenever they think about all these organisms just popping up out of nowhere, they think, "Oh, that's crazy. It can't be that because of that." But then you compare, well, all these organisms popping up out of nowhere is kind of equivalent to abiogenesis,
I don't
where
think
I'm
that
not.
that's the case at all.
Did I miss what? I think I might have
I,
miscommunicated
I,
something.
I mean, abiogenesis is merely a collection of different biochemical systems that are gradually uh, gaining in that are gradually changing in how they take in and dissipate energy, which I don't think is the orchard of life necessitates organisms just wholesale coming into existence.
Yeah, and it would have to be to make sense of that coming into existence. In order to make sense of that, it would have to be like a simulation type of argument. Which I'm cool with the abiogenesis if it happened. I'm cool with the simulation theory. I'm not trying to side with the multiple tree of life. I'm not trying to say mine's right, yours is right, or yours is wrong. I'm saying I think they're pretty equal. But
I would not say that they're equal.
you wouldn't.
No, I mean they're we can make predictions based on models of common ancestry. We we could theoretically make predictions about models of separate ancestry, but they don't work.
No, they don't.
No, they don't.
Oh,
I mean, when you look at, well, we can make a. Here, one second. This cat
okay.
opened the door. I gotta go close the door again. One second. It's just gonna bother me. Yeah, when you look at certain fossils, like Microraptor, Tiktaalik, Australopithecines, etc., we can make predictions about certain types of fossils or what we should expect fossils to look like if these organisms were connected by common descent. You can't make that sort of prediction with separate ancestry.
Okay, but so couldn't Tiktaalik fit, say, for example, here
But why? Why?
or here?
What that would imply is that you have a set of fish with some tetrapod characteristics, and then another set of fish with increasingly tetrapod characteristics, and then a set of tetrapods with fish characteristics. I mean, it's why would you make? What's the point of making all these separate trees?
Oh, you mean there's a gradual evolution that we have?
Right. I mean, if you look at the fossils, you've got the lobe-finned fish. You've got at the base the coelacanths, and you got lungfish a bit closer to tetrapods, and then you've got the rhizodonts, which are even closer to tetrapods, and then got fish like Tiktaalik and Eusthenopteron, which are even closer to tetrapods. Then you have the first tetrapods, which have very primitive characters. Then you have slightly more advanced tetrapods. And so, I mean, what would be the point of making all those separate trees? It seems to form this
You
very
see,
gradual sequence.
well, that makes sense. If I only have access to YouTube videos really on the internet. I've seen videos where they show the gradual what am I looking for? Morphology over time. Is that what I'm trying to look for?
Well, I mean, you have Google, right?
Yeah.
Well, with Google, you have access to Google Scholar, and you can look up the technical literature on these finds and see how many fossils there are in that
Okay.
transition.
All right.
You don't have to rely on YouTube. You can go straight to the papers.
So it's Google Scholar. I've never used it. So you just go to Google and type in Scholar, and it'll give me all the papers.
Yeah, Google Scholar. Yeah, just type in Google Scholar, and it'll give you. It'll have a little search bar, and just type in tetrapod evolution, or tetrapod transition, or something like that, and it will give you reams of papers on that subject. You can find basically papers on like any technical or any scientific subject. It's wonderful.
Okay. So you don't like to talk about abiogenesis, though, do you?
I mean, it's not
Off
crucial.
limit? It's not off limits.
I mean, I can. I typically don't because it's. I mean, that's a place where I can just acknowledge. Okay, we don't know everything. So what? But I'm perfectly. Which is why, because we don't know everything about abiogenesis. We don't know how life started. We might never know how life started, or we probably won't ever. But um, but which is why I can just say, for the sake of argument, okay, I don't know, but we still have 4 billion years of evolution that we have to address.
Okay.
That's just how I tackled that usually.
Because people that believe in evolution don't like to talk about abiogenesis, typically.
I mean, it's a very complicated subject. You're talking about a field, an interdisciplinary field that mixes physics, geochemistry, and biochemistry. And I've talked to people who work in that field. Go talk to Sygart, or I talked to protein biologists. I've talked to a lot of people. It's an extremely complicated subject. It's not so much. I mean, maybe they don't like to talk about it because of how complicated it is.
Yeah, probably.
If you read a book on abiogenesis, like Nick Lane's book, The Vital Question, it can get. He's very good at distilling these very technical concepts, making them rather easy to understand. That's what I like about his book.
Yeah, I'm subscribed to a abiogenesis group, and I talk to them every now and then when I got a question. But they don't really have a working theory. It's really just a hypothesis. So stages they say it's in its hypothesis stages. But I was going to ask you, if abiogenesis was communicated to be not possible, would that mean creation? Would that mean to you that creation would be true, whether or not evolution is true or not?
If abiogenesis were impossible, I mean, I'm not sure how. Science is not in the business of demonstrating impossibilities. Science is in the business of demonstrating possibilities. If
Okay.
if we say, okay, here's a million hypotheses for abiogenesis, none of these work. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That just means we have a million hypotheses that don't work.
Okay, then yeah. Because in my mind, you could probably tell me what's wrong with this reasoning. I don't. Even though I'm not a scientist, I don't think that abiogenesis is a reasonable stance. And that being said, I'm left with two choices. Either with the diversification of life, either evolution happened, or universal common ancestry, or something like this happened. And I'm kind of a proponent advocate for simulation theory. Not the simulation theory you're probably thinking about, not a computer simulation theory, a different kind of simulation. And but you just gave me a lot of homework to do because I gotta go on Google Scholar and look up all other things you talked about.
Well, I guess I have to ask, have you read any of the technical literature regarding abiogenesis?
No, I let the scientists do it, and then what I do is I ask some questions.
So, what? So why do you consider it not to be a reasonable stance if you're not familiar with the literature? Wouldn't you say
Okay,
it's better for yourself to be apprised of the material rather than to just let other people read it for you?
because I don't have time for that, but I think the way I used to be on Facebook groups and I used to ask a lot of scientists there, but the way I put it was, would you expect like a poppy seed to emerge from like an ancient Earth,
No,
but you would expect a bacteria to emerge from ancient Earth
not
before like
necessarily.
no?
I mean, you're kind of confusing these two separate issues. Abiogenesis is merely how the first cells originated, which would have been extremely simple. They would not have been much like the all of the organisms today have are modern organisms. Their lineages have existed for 4 billion years. Every bacterium on the planet, whether it's E. coli or was it Vibrio, whatever, their lineages have existed for 4 billion years, just as long as our lineages have. They are just as modern as we are. They're just as evolved as we are, right? So the first organisms, the very first cells would have been extremely, extremely simple. We're talking, I mean, they would have had just a few cellular parts like ribosomes, some sort of genetic material, whether RNA or DNA, an ATP synthase, just a few little basic structures. They wouldn't have had all the cellular machinery that modern prokaryotes have. That would have come along tens of millions or hundreds of millions of years later.
All right. But that's what I did, though. But it would be a protocell, wouldn't it? That's what it would be called, as a protocell.
Well, that's what. I mean, that's one way they. That's one thing they call it. Yeah, protocells.
Yeah. The other, I guess I got some questions here. I don't expect you to know all this just per se, because but I'm not gonna hold it against you if you don't. But like, I don't see how a bacteria could evolve into a eukaryote.
Endosymbiosis.
Yeah, like, so you're saying that mitochondria resembles bacteria.
Well, I mean,
and
they are bacteria.
they're still
the broken remains of bacteria. Yeah.
the broken remains.
I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
But how do we know they don't just resemble bacteria, and that they really were once bacteria? Because I know they have DNA.
Yeah, they have a single circular chromosome, or a single circular DNA strand, just like bacteria. They have, they're affected by bactericidal medicine, whereas the rest of the cell isn't, and vice versa. When the rest of the cell is affected by antibiotics, then the mitochondria is not affected. Or, I mean, we've also sequenced the mitochondria's genes, and it's closest to the Rickettsia bacterium. So I mean,
Okay.
It's also got the inner membrane of the mitochondria is also bacteria-like, as opposed to eukaryote-like. The outer membrane of it is eukaryote-like, though. So yeah, there's a lot of different pieces of evidence that indicate that it's a bacterium, or it was a bacterium.
See, I understand that I could understand that scientists would be like, mitochondria was once bacteria. By the way, it's interesting to note that you said that they're affected by antibiotics. So whenever we take antibiotics, we harm our mitochondria.
Well, when you take, if you take like bactericidal medicine, and that does affect the mitochondria. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. But I wonder if I got an analogy for this one. All right, so if you take a lighter, and a hand lighter, right? It's free to move about, right? And then but it makes fire. But you have a chimney, and it's built into a house, and it makes fire. One's built in, and one's free to roam about. And I was wondering, what if you could apply that to the mitochondria and bacteria? How mitochondria, how the cell has something built that a bacteria could do built into it, and then it just resembles.
I mean, I'm not really following the analogy. I mean, eukaryotic cells have their own parts, which prokaryotic cells don't. But eukaryotic cells are descended from Archaean cells. Like the eukaryote is an Archaean which engulfed a bacterium, which was the proto-mitochondria. So
so it was an archaea bacteria. So I'm wondering if...
Well, archaea is a separate domain.
Oh, yeah, archaea, bacteria, and...
eukaryotes, yeah.
Eukaryota. But it was just my theory that I don't think anybody's ever thought about before. What if that the mitochondria only resembles the archaea bacteria, and actually maybe it wasn't once archaea bacteria to begin with. Because it does what it does. It makes ATP, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, this archaea bacteria makes ATP. So what if I'm an atheist, but let's just say God for now, right? God said that we're gonna make a eukaryotic cell, we're gonna give it its own little powerhouse, and it's gonna resemble archaea bacteria, but it's not gonna be from archaea bacteria, it's just gonna resemble it. How do we distinguish from whether or not it resembles it or was once it?
You would have to first provide evidence that that's even a useful hypothesis. It's not testable. If you say, what if it's not, but it looks like it has all the markers of what we would expect if this were a bacterium, but it's not. That's not a testable hypothesis. Unless you have some way to distinguish between... Okay, it's trying to get in there, but... unless you have some way to distinguish between an actual bacterium and an organelle that does everything, or that has all the features of a bacterium, it doesn't mean anything. It's not testable. So
Okay, but do you find it interesting that I brought that up in that way, or you don't think it was interesting at all?
I mean, there are already creationists who sort of say that. Like, I think Nathaniel
really?
Jensen said the mitochondria is just a little compartment in the cell. That was his way of kind of carping at the notion of endosymbiosis. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what he says. So.
Okay, well, I thought it was unique. I thought I figured it out. All right. Well, that's about it. You think, well, because evolution states we're related to plants.
Mm-hmm.
We descended from sea sponges or something like sea sponges.
I mean, sponges are the most basal animals, but I wouldn't say we're not descended from sponges.
Something like it.
Possibly.
And in my mind, I can't wrap my head around it. I just think,
Around what?
I bet around the idea that we could descend from sponges.
Why?
Or some, because I could think, for some reason, I just think that there could be 1,000 different varieties of sea sponges or whatever, but I can't see that it could get out of that gene barrier.
I don't know what you, I mean, our common ancestor with sponges lived like 800 million years ago. And so you're talking about at that time there was a population which split, and some had mutations which eventually gave rise to the rest of the animal kingdom eventually, and the other one had mutations and underwent natural selection that forced them to be what we now know as sponges. I don't see anything, and that's just part of evolution.
You would say that it was sponges or something. I'm just gonna say sponge-like evolved into, would you say, a comb jelly? You know what a comb jellyfish is?
Yes, those are ctenophores. Yes.
Yeah. So we evolved. So it went from sea sponge-like creature, then it evolved into comb jelly-like creature.
Well, not our ancestor necessarily. You just have an animal ancestor which gave rise to sponges and also gave rise to comb jellies, but we don't know what it looked like. We don't really have... There are very few fossils of animals that far back.
So it's pretty much speculation because we don't have the fossils.
I mean, it's not really speculation. We can show through genetic sequences that jellyfish are, sister to the triploblastic animals, and before you get to the jellyfish or the cnidarians, you have placozoans and ctenophores and porphyrians. That's not. I mean, we know this based on their genetic sequences. It's not. They're not just guessing, really.
I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it that way.
Okay.
I meant it in a different way, but I don't remember how that was. But so I want to talk about human ancestry.
Okay.
Just because it's popular a lot, people care a lot because they think humans are special for some reason. So, do you think in our ancestry there was something that lives that was like a comb jelly, but not a comb jelly, but something that lived?
Probably not. I think probably the comb jellies are you know the form that the comb jelly form probably arose sometime after our split from them.
Oh, really? Because
Probably.
I'm trying to find out human evolution from sea sponge like sea sponge like creature, to humans, and I'm trying to fill in the early gaps. Because what you see whenever you type in human evolution, you're gonna get a bunch of apes
Well,
evolving into
well,
we are
yeah.
apes.
I mean, well, yeah, because
That's as
consider
far.
you don't consider evolution that far down to be our own evolution. I mean, you could just as easily call it elephant evolution or insect evolution.
My favorite is butterfly evolution because I don't, I haven't seen anybody that would explain how a butterfly would evolve with metamorphosis. Perhaps there's a way,
There are actually
but
papers on that.
there are.
Yeah.
I know. I haven't read the papers, but I've read the articles. Like I think it was Nature or something, and they label it as like a mystery.
I mean, I've seen papers talk about you just have to get all you have to do is take really an organism and section its ontogeny into parts,
Okay.
you know, and then you just over time you just make the end products more extreme.
Okay, because I'll have to ask you to help me out with that later on over the text because I want to read it more about it.
I mean, I'm sure you can
But
look it up on Google Scholar.
okay then, Google Scholar. Okay. Uh, but it seems to me that the metamorphic process would be irreducibly complex in a sense. Now, I'm not talking about a machine that's irreducibly complex. I'm talking about a process, like the metamorphic process being irreducibly complex. But is there any way I can show you something on my screen?
Sure, just screen share.
Okay, let it load. Let it load. Okay, how do you do screen share?
On this,
There might not be a way.
there should. Is it this? I'm trying to remember how to. Oh yeah, at the bottom there should be a little. You see the green button where it says share?
I don't have any button access.
Hmm.
It's no big. It's no big deal. Uh, yeah. There's no way. There's no button at all. I have no. I have no rights. It's
Oh.
no big deal. It's no big deal. I was just gonna show you a picture of a creationist drawing, but it's no big deal. Which I don't agree with. They're trying to show all animals alive today evolving into what a human, even though they're extant, but no big
Right.
deal. Um, what I was trying to get at was, never mind. I don't have a picture, so it'll be too complicated to
Okay.
speak about.
That's fine.
Um, uh, so I appreciate you helping me with my questions. Do you have any questions for me?
Um. Are you convinced of a single phylogeny now?
I'm convinced I got to do a lot more research on it. I was never against it. Well, actually, in the beginning, I was against it, but I changed my arguments to actually acknowledge that it is an interesting theory. I'm not, like I said, I'm not like Kid Hovind who says evolution is stupid or it's fraudulent.
Hmm.
But I don't know. My main thing here is with consciousness, and I know most people think consciousness comes from the brain, but
I don't really know a whole lot about consciousness.
I know a lot about it. But it's hard to wrap your head around the brain making consciousness, which is the main reason why I dabbled into evolution in the first place, is because of consciousness.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just want to thank you for everything, your time,
So, was my explanation of endosymbiosis satisfactory?
Yeah, you said something about you said a lot of good things. One of the main thing I was interested in was that they're affected by antibiotics.
Well, yeah. I mean, there. If you look up, oh, let me see if I can find it. I have it right.
And well, you were talking about endosymbiosis. Well, you still got to account for these cells must not have had circular DNA. These protocells. I'm trying to figure out how the X and Y chromosomes, which we both know that they're not X and Y, they're only X and Y wherever they go through mitosis. But how do the X and Y chromosomes come along?
Well, that would likely have been very much later. A long, long, long time later.
And helicase, the molecular machines, the helicases, the histones, the
Well, histones are just a protein.
yeah,
Helicases are
histones.
also just proteins.
They're just proteins, but they came in at the right time. They must have came in at the right time. Because when I look up animations of molecular machinery like motor proteins, and it just looks like where did all these come from? Conveniently come from. I think
Well,
life has just conveniently popped up.
I don't think so at all. I mean, you can. There are also papers on helicases on mutating helicases. Yeah, here we go. Okay, here's one paper. Bactericidal antibiotics induce mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative damage in mammalian cells. Sorry. So yeah, aminoglycosides target both bacterial and mitochondrial ribosomes. Quinolones target bacterial gyrases and mitochondrial DNA topoisomerases, and beta lactams inhibit bacterial cell wall synthesis and mitochondrial carnitine acylcarnitine transporters. Yeah, if you take, yeah, like I said, if you take bactericidal antibiotics, you can yeah, you can damage mitochondria just like you damage bacteria.
But they'll grow back, though. I'm sure, right? You think they'll grow back?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Every time you know, your cells divide, get your mitochondria. So
Yeah. Well, I really thought that I was the only one that thought about that. That they resemble bacteria, and not necessarily were bacteria. But I guess that really burst my bubble right there.
okay, so
Yeah, but I think the second best, well, the evidence, nested hierarchies is a good evidence for evolution. However, if with nested hierarchies, if there was a creation event, you would either have to think A, that's the way they organized it, the creator, or B, they're trying to trick us.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think to the best way to show separate hierarchies or separate ancestries would definitely be to not make nested hierarchies. You know, it seems like it'd be so much easier to just, well, I mean, if we're talking about, a being that is capable of anything, should be no problem at all to make every kind or type completely separate from every other one. That way we could easily distinguish the different kinds. We could never get confused. It wouldn't, like earlier, we wouldn't, there'd be no reason to have tetrapod like fish and fish like tetrapods. There'd be no reason for that. We would just have fish and we would have tetrapods and they would be completely separate. But we don't have that, so.
Yeah, nested hierarchies is a good one. However, I don't put it past nature to be tricky, but I acknowledge both sides for what they are, and I always forget what I'm going to say. But yeah, those were pretty much it. I want to talk about the tree of life and nested hierarchies. You don't talk about consciousness much or abiogenesis, but there's I think there's two types of life. There's biological life, and then there's consciousness. Oh yeah, I remember what I was gonna say now. But whenever I talk about a creator, I don't talk about God. There's a type of simulation argument, which is the most ancient one there is, where we're consciousness that's pretty much dreaming a reality or hallucinating a reality, and our subconscious minds create our environment. Um, but yeah, I'm not religious. I don't think there's a creator God.
Okay.
That's crazy, isn't it?
In
What
this video, I'll
what's
show
crazy?
you
I mean, I don't think that the ideas. I mean, the idea is not necessarily crazy. I just don't see any reason to believe it. I suppose.
Uh, yeah, but you do. Have you heard of it before?
I
That
don't
we
think
that we are
so.
the creators. That we are the creators. I'm an atheistic creationist, so to speak. If you want to put a label on it, I don't believe in God, but I believe in creation, and I think we are the creators. But I could be wrong. I might be, but I just don't see how consciousness plays a part in life.
Okay.
It's mainly about consciousness. Uh, but I've been called crazy for that, so I try not to bring it up.
Okay. Well, it's what it is, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not. I don't really read much about consciousness. It's kind of. I mean, it's interesting, but I don't read a whole lot about it. So.
Yeah, I don't see how you. Oh, okay, yeah, I guess you can. See, because there's a dichotomy of creationism or evolutionism, I guess. What is it? Evolution and creation. There's a dichotomy there, but nobody ever acknowledges the thing I just said. It's always either about Christianity versus science, and mine isn't about science denial. It's more about the interpretation of science.
Okay.
Okay, are we live?
Yeah, we're still live. I mean, people are watching.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
okay. Well, so I guess do you have any more questions, or should we
oh
cut it?
no. Well, how many people are watching?